The wind out on the Wyoming plains wasn't just wind. It sounded like something dying, a high, lonesome cry that pushed sand and grit into every crack of Samuel McKenna's ranch house and every crack of his soul. He stood on his porch, a man of 43 who felt 100. The land was all he had left, a flat brown sea of nothing that stretched to the edge of the world. 3 years. 3 years since he'd buried Martha. 3 winters since the silence in the house got so loud it felt like a physical weight pressing on his ribs, trying to stop his heart. The ranch hands were ghosts. They'd drift in for a season, then drift out, leaving him alone with the coyotes and the memories. Nights were a special kind of hell. He'd sit at the kitchen table staring at the faded apron Martha left on a hook by the stove. It hung there like a question nobody could answer. That silence, that crushing emptiness, is what made him do it. He wasn't a man for dreams or fantasies. He was a man of dirt and cattle and fences. But loneliness is a practical problem, and he needed a practical solution. So he wrote a letter, a matrimonial agency in Chicago. That's where he sent it. They promised wives for men on the frontier, good, suitable women. Samuel's list of requirements was short and sharp, like a fence post. He needed a wife who was slim, obedient, a hard worker, someone between 25 and 35, a woman who wouldn't break when the well ran dry or a blizzard buried them for a month. He saw her in his head. She looked a lot like Martha, quiet, small, with gentle hands and a voice that never rose above a whisper. He told himself it wasn't about love. Love was a ghost that lived in this house, and he didn't have room for another. This was about survival. 2 months, the agency wrote back. 2 months and his new life would step off the train. He spent those 2 months fixing things. The squeaking floorboard in the bedroom, the pantry door that wouldn't shut right. Every nail he hammered was a countdown, a promise. He tried to imagine a new voice in the quiet rooms, but all he could hear was Martha's laugh, fading like an echo. The day she was due to arrive, he put on a shirt so stiff with starch it scraped his neck raw. He got to the Cedar Ridge station an hour early and paced the wooden platform until the station master eyed him with suspicion. The train finally hissed to a stop, a black metal beast breathing steam into the dry air. His palms were slick with sweat. He watched them get off. Salesmen with their sample cases, ranchers smelling of dust and cattle, a preacher holding a Bible like a shield. The crowd thinned out. His heart started to pound a sick, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Was this a trick? Did she change her mind? Was he meant to be alone out here forever? Then he saw her, the last one off the train. She stepped down onto the platform, holding a single beat-up valise, and Samuel's breath just stopped. But not in a good way. Not in any way he had ever imagined. This woman was not a delicate flower. She was a storm cloud. She was tall, full-figured, with a strength in her shoulders that seemed to challenge the wide-open sky. Her traveling dress looked like it was in a constant battle with the woman wearing it, and losing. Her face wasn't pretty. It was handsome, carved from something stronger than porcelain, with eyes the color of a gathering storm. Dark curls escaped her bonnet, wild and untamed. She looked like she'd stared down a blizzard and dared it to do its worst. "Mr. McKenna," she said. Her voice wasn't soft. It had a hint of Ireland in it, but it was coated in Boston steel. It was a voice that gave orders, not one that took them. "Miss O'Brien," he managed, yanking his hat from his head. He took her bag. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked, packed solid with something dense. He led her to the buckboard wagon, and she climbed up onto the seat herself, not waiting for his help. The wagon groaned when she sat down. It was a long 10 miles back to the ranch, and Samuel found himself honestly worried if the axles would hold. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, charged with everything he wasn't saying. Finally, she broke it. "The agency said you were a widower." Her voice was steady, her gaze fixed on the horizon. 3 years, he grunted, not looking at her. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. And for a second, the steel in her voice softened. He just nodded, his jaw clenched tight. He wanted to ask what happened. He wanted to demand an explanation. This wasn't the deal. This wasn't what he paid for. But the words caught in his throat, tangled in pride and fury. She must have felt it. "The agency told me you had Expectations, she said, turning those storm gray eyes on him. He felt a hot flush creep up his neck. He'd been specific. He'd been clear, slim, obedient. I'm 28, she went on, her chin held high, and I came west for a life of my own, not one picked out for me in a Boston parlor. That's the honest truth of it, Mr. McKenna. I am not a slim woman, and I will not apologize for the space I take up in the world. Her words were like a slap. He gripped the leather reins so tight his knuckles turned white, staring at the dusty road ahead. He could already hear the laughter. Tom Bradley at the feed store, clapping him on the back. Heard you ordered a sparrow and got a hawk, Sam. The whole town would be whispering. The fool rancher who couldn't even order a wife right. What in God's name had he gotten himself into? This wasn't a solution. This was a whole new problem. A big one. When they pulled up to the ranch, his old dog, Rex, came bounding out, barking his head off at the stranger. But Margaret O'Brien didn't flinch. She swung down from the wagon, bent over, and held out the back of her hand. The dog stopped barking, sniffed her fingers, and then his tail started wagging like he'd known her his whole life. Samuel watched her murmur to the animal, her voice suddenly low and gentle, and a strange, painful knot twisted in his gut. It was the same voice Martha used to use with the dog, a voice he hadn't heard in 3 years. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of something he couldn't name. It felt dangerously close to betrayal. Inside, the house felt small, crowded. Margaret took it all in, the dust, the sparse furniture, the bachelor's mess, and didn't say a word. Her eyes landed on Martha's apron, still on its hook. She looked at it for a long moment, then her gaze moved on. She walked into the kitchen, started rolling up her sleeves, and asked where he kept the flour and the salt. Her presence was overwhelming. The house was no longer empty. It was filled with the scent of her perfume, the sound of her heavy, confident footsteps, the rustle of her skirts. It was all wrong. I'll go check the fences, he stammered, backing out the door like a cornered animal. She didn't even turn around. Supper will be on the table at 6, she said, her voice already claiming his kitchen. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. He sucked it into his lungs, trying to clear his head. What had he done? He'd ordered a ghost, a quiet shadow to slip into the empty spaces Martha had left. Instead, he got a woman made of thunder and steel, a woman who looked like she could birth a calf and chop down a tree in the same afternoon. He swung onto his horse and rode out, away from the ranch, away from the smoke now curling from his chimney for the first time in ages. He rode hard and fast, as if he could outrun the woman who was currently turning his whole world upside down. But he knew, deep down, he couldn't. Something in that house had changed forever, and he was terrified of it. The first week was like living inside a tightly sealed bottle with a lit fuse. He slept in the barn. He couldn't bring himself to sleep in the house, not yet. Every morning he'd wake up to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He'd walk into the kitchen, and there she'd be, a solid, immovable presence at his stove. She made biscuits. She scrambled eggs. She worked from sunup to sundown, and she never seemed to tire. She scrubbed the floors until the old wood gleamed. She hauled water from the well without a single complaint. She mended his torn shirts with neat, even stitches that surprised him. She was a machine, a perfect, efficient, hard-working machine, and he hated her for it. She was everything a ranch wife needed to be, but she wasn't the woman he grieved for. She wasn't Martha. One evening, he was cleaning his rifle by the fire, and he thought she was out of earshot. I asked for a wife, he muttered into the oilcloth, not a damn field hand. The rhythmic sound of her needle pulling through cloth stopped. Dead silence. He looked up. She was staring at him, her gray eyes as hard and cold as river stones. And what good would a porcelain doll be out here, Samuel? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Would you prefer a woman who cries when she breaks a nail and faints at the sight of a dead rabbit? How long do you think she would last? The truth in her words was a bitter pill. He felt the heat rise in his face, a shameful, angry blush. He stood up and stalked toward the door, needing air. Maybe you should think about what you truly need, her voice followed him, instead of what you think you want. The town, of course, noticed. At the general store, Martha's old friend, Mrs. Henderson, gave Margaret a long, slow look, from the top of her head to the sturdy soles of her boots. "So," she said, a cruel little smirk playing on her lips, "you're Samuel's new bride. A substantial woman, aren't you?" Margaret didn't miss a beat. She smiled, a bright, beautiful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I believe a woman should be built to withstand the life she leads," she said, her voice as sweet as poison. "A strong back for a hard land. Wouldn't you agree, Mrs. Henderson?" The older woman's jaw snapped shut. Samuel, standing by the pickle barrel, felt a flicker of something that felt dangerously like pride. He crushed it down immediately. At the saloon, Tom Bradley wasn't so subtle. He threw a heavy arm around Samuel's shoulders. "Well now, Sam, looks like you got more than you bargained for. Bet she keeps the bed warm on a cold night, eh?" He winked, and the other men snickered into their beers. Samuel's hand balled into a fist. But before he could swing, Margaret, who had come in looking for him, stepped forward. "A man who works as hard as my husband deserves a good meal and a warm bed," she said, her voice ringing with unwavering confidence. "I intend to provide him with both." The men shuffled their feet, suddenly awkward. She had taken their mockery and worn it like a shield. On the ride home, the silence was different. It wasn't angry anymore. It was confusing. That Saturday, the tension finally snapped. She had heated water on the stove for a bath, hanging a thick blanket across one corner of the kitchen for privacy. Samuel sat in the main room, trying to read the paper, but he couldn't focus. He could hear the soft splash of water, the sigh of soap against skin. He tried not to picture it, tried not to think of her behind that thin blanket. But the images came anyway, sharp and unwelcome. When she stepped out, her face was flushed from the steam, her dark hair curling in damp tendrils around her neck. She was wearing a simple white nightgown, and in the soft lamplight, the fabric clung to the powerful curves of her body. His throat went dry. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor, and without a single word, he fled to the cold safety of the barn. He felt like a boy, a coward. But he didn't know what else to do. He was married to a stranger who was starting to feel less and less like a mistake, and that scared him more than anything. The preacher came on Sunday. Reverend Palmer was a thin, nervous man who always looked like he was expecting bad news. Margaret wore a dark blue dress. It wasn't fancy, but it fit her perfectly, accentuating the strong line of her shoulders and her narrow waist. She had pinned her hair up, and she looked handsome, regal even, a queen in a homesteader's cabin. Tom Bradley stood as Samuel's witness, that same infuriating smirk plastered on his face the whole time. The ceremony was blessedly short. When it came time for the ring, Samuel's hands trembled. He pulled a small worn gold band from his pocket. It was Martha's. Placing it on Margaret's finger felt like a betrayal so profound it made him dizzy. It didn't fit properly. Her fingers were stronger, thicker than Martha's. He had to force it over her knuckle. "You may kiss the bride," the preacher chirped. Samuel leaned in. He was aiming for her cheek, a quick, dutiful peck. But at the last second, she turned her head. Her lips met his. They were softer than he expected. Warmer. He pulled back as if he'd been burned, his heart hammering against his ribs. Tom Bradley laughed out loud. "Congratulations, Sam," he boomed, clapping him on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "May your marriage bed prove as sturdy as your bride." Margaret's cheeks flamed red, but she held her head high, her gaze unwavering. She was magnificent, and in that moment, watching her stand there, defiant and proud, Samuel felt a terrifying thought surface. Maybe this wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was something else entirely, something he wasn't ready for. That night, the barn felt colder than ever. He knew he couldn't sleep there anymore. He was a husband now. It was a fact, legally binding, witnessed by God and Tom Bradley. He walked into the house, his boots heavy on the floorboards. She was sitting in a chair by the dying fire, still in her blue dress. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face. You'll need to move your things into the bedroom," he said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "If that is what you wish," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "It's what's expected," he said gruffly. We're married. A flicker of something crossed her face. Pain, disappointment, maybe even fear. But it was gone in an instant. Yes, she said softly, standing up. We are married? The old bed frame, the one he'd shared with Martha, groaned under their combined weight. It was a sound of protest, a sound of violation. Samuel lay on the very edge of the mattress, his body rigid, his back to her. He could feel her warmth across the few inches of empty space between them. He could hear the soft sound of her breathing. The silence stretched on, filled with the ghosts of what could have been and the terrifying reality of what was. Then her voice came out of the darkness, a quiet, wounded whisper. I know I am not what you wanted, Samuel. The words were a knife in the dark. They twisted in his gut, sharp and cold. He wanted to say something, anything, to deny it. He wanted to offer some small comfort, but the pride, the grief, the sheer stubborn anger wouldn't let him. We'll make do, was all he said. Her sigh was a tiny, heartbreaking sound. She turned away from him, the springs crying out again. The bed held, for now. But Samuel lay awake, long into the night, staring into the darkness, listening to the wind howl. He had a wife. He had a house. He had a ranch. But he was more lost than he had ever been in his life. And he had a terrible feeling that the whispers in town were nothing compared to the storm that was brewing right here, under his own roof. He found it by accident. He was looking for a spare leather strap in the barn, digging through an old trunk where they kept odds and ends. His hand brushed against something small and hard at the bottom. He pulled it out. It was a small tin box, the kind used for holding photographs. It was tucked away, hidden beneath old blankets. It must have fallen out of her heavy valise. His first instinct was to put it back. It wasn't his. But curiosity, a sharp and vicious thing, got the better of him. His fingers fumbled with the clasp. Inside there were two things. The first was a photograph, a daguerreotype of a man. He was handsome, dressed in city clothes with a slick, confident smile and cold, dark eyes. He was standing in front of a brick building, looking like he owned the whole world. On the back, in delicate, looping script, were the words, My dearest M, until we meet again. Yours, C. Samuel's blood ran cold. C. Who the hell was C? Was this the reason her bag was so heavy? Was she bringing mementos of a lover to her new husband's home? The anger was so sudden and hot it almost choked him. The other item in the box was a folded piece of paper. A newspaper clipping. It was from the Boston Herald, dated 6 months prior. The headline was stark. Shipping magnate Cornelius Addington acquitted of fraud charges. Key witness vanishes. Samuel read the article, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It described a massive fraud case. A man named Cornelius Addington, who had swindled dozens of families out of their life savings. The case fell apart, the article said, because the prosecution's main witness, a bookkeeper who worked for Addington, disappeared just days before the trial. The article didn't name the witness. It didn't have to. Cornelius. C. Samuel looked from the newspaper clipping to the photograph. It was the same man, the man with the cold, confident eyes. And Margaret O'Brien, his new wife, had a picture of him hidden in a box with a promise written on the back. Until we meet again. He confronted her that night. He waited until after supper. The plates cleared away. The house settled into its tense, quiet routine. He placed the tin box on the kitchen table between them. It landed with a soft, metallic thud that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. She looked at the box, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Samuel saw a crack in her composure. Her face went pale. Her hands, which were busy mending a shirt, went perfectly still. Where did you find that? She asked, her voice a low whisper. In the barn, he said, his own voice hard as iron. Fell out of your things, I imagine. Who is he, Margaret? She didn't answer. She just stared at the box, her jaw tight. I said, who is he? He repeated, his voice rising. He slid the photograph across the table. This man. Yours, see. Who is he? Margaret finally looked up at him, and her storm-gray eyes were filled with a swirling mixture of fear and defiance. He is a man I knew in Boston, she said carefully. A mistake. Someone I left behind. And the newspaper clipping, he pressed, pushing it towards her. Is he the reason you left behind Boston? Because you were a witness against him? A witness who conveniently vanished? Her composure shattered. She stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You have no right, she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. You have no right to dig through my past. I have every right, he roared back, slamming his fist on the table. You are my wife. You live under my roof. If you brought trouble here, I have a right to know. The only trouble here is your own stubborn pride, Samuel McKenna, she shot back. You think this is about you? About your wounded honor because I'm not some skinny, simpering girl you can mold into a replacement for your dead wife? The words hit him like a physical blow. He recoiled, speechless. I came here to escape, she said, her voice dropping, thick with an emotion he couldn't decipher. That is all you need to know. The past is the past. Cornelius Addington can't touch me out here. But Samuel looked at the confident, cruel face in the photograph, and he didn't believe her. He didn't believe her at all. That night, lying in the dark, the space between them in the bed felt like a canyon. He wasn't just lying next to a stranger anymore. He was lying next to a woman with a secret, a dangerous secret, and he had a sinking feeling that she hadn't escaped her past. She had just led it right to his front door. A few weeks later, a stranger rode into town. He wasn't a rancher or a salesman. He was dressed in a dark city suit that looked out of place against the dusty backdrop of Cedar Ridge. He was asking questions, quiet questions at first. He'd buy a man a drink at the saloon and ask about the newcomers in the area. He'd chat with Mrs. Henderson over the counter at the general store, asking if any new folks had settled nearby in the last few months. Tom Bradley was the one who told Samuel about it. There's a fella in town, Sam, he said, cornering him by the blacksmith's forge. A Pinkerton, by the look of him, asking all sorts of questions about a woman who came in on the train a while back. Tall woman, dark hair. Tom gave him a long, meaningful look. Sounds a bit like your new missus, don't it? Samuel's blood turned to ice. He made his excuses and rode back to the ranch, his mind racing. A Pinkerton, a detective. Was he looking for a missing witness? Or was he working for Cornelius Addington, sent to track her down and silence her? The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. When he got back, Margaret was in the yard chopping wood. The axe rose and fell with a steady, powerful rhythm. She was strong, capable, but she wasn't invincible. He swung down from his horse. There's a man in town, he said, his voice flat. A detective. He's asking about you. The axe stopped mid-swing. She slowly lowered it, her knuckles white. She didn't look at him. She stared at the chopping block, at the clean white wood she had just split. I see, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Margaret, he said, taking a step closer. You have to tell me the truth, all of it. What is going on? Ah, she finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a desperate, hunted look that he had never seen before. His name is Agent Phillips, she said, her voice shaking slightly. He works for the U.S. Marshals. They wanted me to testify. I was the head bookkeeper for Addington's company. I found the ledgers, the real ones, that showed how he stole everything. I was their star witness. So you ran, he said, the pieces clicking into place. Why? Why would you run from them? Because Addington has half of Boston's politicians and judges in his pocket, she cried, the words tumbling out in a rush. They couldn't protect me. The day before the trial was set to start, a man broke into my boarding house. He told me if I ever set foot in that courtroom, my body would be pulled out of the Charles River. He said Addington sends his regards. So I ran. I took a train west, answered the first matrimonial ad I saw that was far enough away. I picked you, Samuel. I picked this empty, desolate place because I thought nobody would ever find me here. He stared at her, this strong, proud woman, and for the first time, he saw the terror she had been living with. She wasn't a criminal. She was a victim, hunted and alone. The man in the photo, he said quietly, Cornelius Addington. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. He promised me the world. I thought he loved me, but he was just using me to help him build his empire of lies. The story was worse than he imagined. Far worse. It wasn't just a jilted lover. It was a powerful, ruthless man who would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. And Margaret hadn't just brought her past to his door. She'd brought a monster. The storm came 2 days later. Not a rainstorm, but a dust storm. One of those Wyoming blizzards made of earth instead of snow. The sky turned a sickening shade of yellow-brown, and the wind screamed like a banshee, tearing at the house, trying to rip the boards apart. Samuel had been trying to get the last of the cattle into the barn when the horizon simply disappeared, swallowed by a churning wall of dust. He fought his way back to the house, grit stinging his eyes and coating his throat. Margaret was there, wrestling with a loose shutter, her hair whipping around her face, her skirts plastered against her legs. "Get inside," he yelled, but the wind snatched the words and threw them away. They worked together, not as husband and wife, but as partners in a desperate battle against the elements. They nailed the shutters down, stuffed rags into the cracks around the doors and windows, fought to keep their world from being blown away or buried. When it was finally done, they collapsed at the kitchen table, coughing, exhausted, covered in a fine layer of dust. The house groaned around them as the storm raged outside. It was like being in the belly of a beast. For hours they sat in the dim, dusty light, the howl of the wind the only sound. "He'll find me," she said suddenly, her voice small against the roar of the storm. "A man like that doesn't just give up. He'll send someone." "We'll be ready for them," Samuel said, the words coming out before he had a chance to think about them. He looked at her, at the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the fierce determination in her eyes. He thought of the matrimonial ad, of the slim, obedient woman he had requested. What a fool he had been. A delicate flower would have been ripped to shreds by this land, by this life. He needed a woman made of rock and steel. He needed Margaret. "Why did you keep the picture?" he asked, his voice softer now. "A reminder," she said, her gaze distant, "to never be that foolish again, to never trust a man's pretty words when his eyes are cold as stone." The storm raged for 2 days. Trapped in the house, they started to talk. Really talk. She told him about her life in Boston, about her dreams of being more than just someone's wife, about the betrayal that had shattered her world. He told her about Martha, about the sickness that had stolen her away bit by bit, about the crushing loneliness of the plains. They were two broken people, hiding from their ghosts in the heart of a storm. And somewhere in those 2 days, surrounded by the screaming wind and the dust-filled darkness, something shifted between them. The anger began to dissolve, replaced by a grudging respect, a fragile understanding. He started to see the woman, not the mistake. He saw her courage, her resilience, her unwavering strength. And he realized that this woman, this stranger, was more of a partner than he had ever dared to hope for. The dust storm had barely settled when they came, 3 riders materializing out of the hazy brown twilight. They weren't cowboys. They were dressed in dark dusters, their hats pulled low, their movements cold and professional. Samuel saw them from the porch and his stomach clenched. "Get the shotgun," he said to Margaret, his voice low and calm. "Go to the back room. Stay away from the windows." She didn't argue. She just nodded, her face pale but her eyes steady, and disappeared into the house. He grabbed his rifle from its rack by the door. The riders stopped just outside the fence line. One of them, a big man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, dismounted. "McKenna!" he yelled, his voice a rough, gravelly bark. "We know she's in there. Send out the woman and we'll leave you in peace." Samuel recognized the man. It was Jake Morrison, a local troublemaker who'd been suspected of rustling before. But he wasn't acting like a common thief now. He was acting like a hired gun. Addington's hired gun. "You're on private property, Morrison!" Samuel shouted back, leveling his rifle. "Ride out now or be carried out." Morrison laughed, a short, ugly sound. "We're not here for your cattle, old man. We're here for the bookkeeper. Mr. Addington sends his regards." So this was it. The past hadn't just come to his door. It was here to burn it down. "She's not here," Samuel lied, his heart hammering. "You've got the wrong place." Morrison just smiled, a predator's smile. He drew his pistol. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way." He fired. The shot wasn't aimed at Samuel. It was aimed at the house. It splintered the wood of the porch railing, inches from Samuel's hand. It was a warning. Before Samuel could fire back, a second shot rang out, this one from inside the house. It came from the side window. One of the other riders cried out and clutched his arm, his pistol falling to the dust. Margaret. She hadn't hidden. She had found a vantage point. The fight was on. Gunshots echoed across the silent plains. Morrison and his men used their horses for cover, their bullets thudding into the walls of the small ranch house. Samuel fired back, the rifle kicking against his shoulder, each shot carefully aimed. But there were three of them. He was pinned down on the porch. He saw Morrison start to move, circling around toward the barn, trying to flank him. He was trapped. Just as Morrison raised his pistol, a blur of motion erupted from the side of the house. It was Margaret. She wasn't holding the shotgun. She was holding the wood axe. She moved with a speed that was terrifying, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't scream or shout. She was completely silent. She swung the axe not at Morrison, but at the thick rope tethering the water trough. The heavy wooden trough, full of water, tipped over with a mighty crash, spooking Morrison's horse. The animal reared, screaming, and threw Morrison to the ground. In that split second of chaos, Samuel took his shot. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed for Morrison's leg. The man went down, howling in pain. The other two, seeing their leader down and their partner wounded, didn't wait around. They spurred their horses and fled back into the dust-choked twilight, leaving Morrison writhing on the ground. Silence fell. The only sound was the wind and Morrison's moans. Samuel stood there, his rifle still smoking, his heart pounding. He looked at Margaret. She stood over the downed man, the axe held loosely in her hand, her chest heaving. She had just faced down 3 hired guns with nothing but a farm tool and raw courage. He had ordered a wife. He had gotten a warrior. He walked over to her, his legs feeling unsteady. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the man on the ground. He said Addington sent him. "I know," Samuel said. He reached out and took the axe from her hand. Her fingers were cold as ice. He looked from her face to the sprawling ranch, to the darkening sky. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Addington wouldn't stop. He would send more men, better men. They couldn't stay here. "Pack your things," he said, his voice firm. "Just the essentials. We're leaving." "Leaving?" She looked at him, confused. "Where are we going?" "We're not running," he said, meeting her gaze. "Not anymore. We're going to Cheyenne. We're going to find that Pinkerton agent. You're going to testify, and we are going to finish this." For the first time, a small, weary smile touched her lips. "We?" she asked softly. "Yes," Samuel said, the word feeling more right than any word he had ever spoken. "We." The journey to Cheyenne was fraught with tension. Every shadow on the trail looked like a threat. Every rider in the distance a potential assassin. They rode hard, speaking little, bound by a shared, unspoken fear. Samuel found Agent Phillips in a dusty hotel room that smelled of stale cigars. He was a small, neat man with tired eyes that had seen too much. He listened to their story without interruption, his expression unreadable. "You should have come to us, Mrs. McKenna," he said when Samuel had finished. He used her new name without hesitation. "We could have protected you." "Could you?" Margaret shot back, her voice sharp. "Could you have protected me from a man who owns judges and pays killers like other men pay for a shave?" "I did what I had to do to survive." Phillips sighed, running a hand over his weary face. "Perhaps you're right. Addington is a snake with friends in high places, but running only delayed the inevitable. He was never going to let you live." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But now things are different. Another one of his schemes has unraveled. A railroad deal. This time, he's made enemies in Washington. Powerful enemies. They want him. They need him. And you, madam, are the key." "So I testify," Margaret said, her chin high. "And you guarantee my safety." "And your husband's," Phillips added, looking at Samuel. "Addington knows who you are now, Mr. McKenna. He'll see you as part of the problem. We'll put you both in protective custody until the trial." The trial was set to take place in a federal court in Denver. They traveled by train, under the constant watch of two stone-faced marshals. In Denver, they were hidden away in a safe house, a small, anonymous apartment on a quiet street. The days leading up to the trial were a strange, surreal limbo. They were trapped together in a few small rooms, with nothing to do but wait. The tension between them, once born of anger and misunderstanding, was now a fragile, electric thing. One evening, she was standing by the window, looking down at the street below. "I never should have involved you in this, Samuel," she said quietly. "This was my fight." He came to stand beside her. "You didn't involve me," he said. "Morrison and his men did that when they fired on my home. This rancher, this piece of land, it's all I have. They threatened it. They threatened us. It's my fight now, too." She turned to look at him, her gray eyes searching his face in the dim light. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this? I'm not the woman you wanted." "No," he said, his voice rough. "You're not. You're stubborn, and you're far too handy with an axe. You take up more space than any three women I've ever known." He saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes and reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "You are also the bravest person I have ever met. You're loyal. You're strong in ways I'm only just beginning to understand. You are exactly the woman this land requires. The woman I require? I was just too blind and stubborn to see it." And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't like the fumbled, awkward kiss at their wedding. This was a kiss of truth, of acceptance. It was a kiss that sealed a pact made in dust storms and gunfire. It was the moment a marriage of convenience became something real. The courtroom was an imposing cavern of dark wood and high ceilings. Cornelius Addington sat at the defendant's table, looking calm and confident in his expensive suit. His cold eyes found Margaret as she walked to the witness stand, and he gave her a small, chilling smile. It was a smile that promised retribution. But when Margaret looked at him, she didn't flinch. She saw Samuel sitting in the front row, his gaze steady and reassuring. She took a deep breath and swore the oath. For 2 days she testified. With methodical precision, she walked the prosecution through the tangled web of Addington's finances. She explained the fake ledgers, the shell companies, the stolen funds. Her voice was clear and strong, filled with an authority that captivated the jury. Addington's high-priced lawyer tried to break her. He attacked her character, accused her of being a scorned lover seeking revenge, painted her as an accomplice trying to save her own skin. But she met every accusation with cold, hard facts. She had the numbers, and the numbers didn't lie. The turning point came when the prosecution presented the second ledger, the one she had hidden, the one that detailed in Addington's own handwriting every stolen dollar. As the evidence was laid out, Samuel saw the first crack in Addington's composure, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow, a tightening around his cold eyes. He knew he was losing. The verdict came on the third day, guilty on all counts. As the marshals led a stunned and furious Cornelius Addington away, his eyes locked with Margaret's one last time. They were no longer cold and confident. They were filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. It was a look that promised this was not over. That night, back in the safe house, a strange sense of anticlimax hung in the air. It was done. She was free. They were safe. But the future was a blank, unwritten page. "What now?" she asked, voicing the question that hung between them. "We go home," Samuel said simply. "We go back to the ranch." "Is it still our home?" she asked, her voice small. "After everything?" He took her hand, his rough fingers lacing through hers. "It's more our home now than it ever was," he said. "A home isn't just wood and nails, Margaret. It's the foundation you build. We built ours out of gunpowder and dust and stubbornness. I'd say it's strong enough to last." They returned to Wyoming not as a rancher and his mail-order bride, but as partners. The whispers in town died down, replaced by a grudging respect. The story of the shootout with Morrison's gang had become local legend, and Margaret was no longer seen as the substantial woman from the East. She was the woman who had faced down hired guns to protect her home. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm of shared work, easy silences, and quiet laughter. They worked side by side, rebuilding the fence Morrison's men had torn down, repairing the bullet holes in the walls of their house. Each nail hammered, each board replaced, was an act of reclaiming their life. But a shadow still lingered. Samuel would sometimes see her staring at the horizon, a worried line between her brows. Addington was in prison, but his reach was long. His money could buy men even from behind bars. The fear was a quiet, unwelcome guest that still sat at their dinner table. One evening, Tom Bradley rode out to the ranch. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "Sam," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his saddle, I I heard some things in town. Some of Morrison's old crew were in the saloon, drunk, talking loud, talking about finishing the job Addington paid them for." Samuel's body went rigid. "When?" "Tonight," Tom said. "They were heading out this way." He looked from Samuel to Margaret, who had come out onto the porch. "I know I ain't always been a friend to you, Sam, but nobody deserves this. I've already sent a rider for the sheriff in Cheyenne, but he won't get here till morning at the earliest. You're on your own till then." Samuel nodded, his face grim. "Thanks for the warning, Tom." "You need help?" Tom asked, his hand hovering near the pistol on his hip. "We can hold them off," Samuel said, his eyes meeting Margaret's. There was no fear in her gaze, only resolve. As Tom rode off, Samuel turned to Margaret. "This is it," he said. "This is the last battle." "Then let's make it a good one," she replied, a grim smile on her face. They didn't just barricade the doors. They prepared for a siege. They loaded every weapon they owned. They placed lanterns in strategic spots to eliminate shadows. They brought water and ammunition into the main room. As darkness fell, a profound and heavy silence descended on the plains. The wind died down. The coyotes were quiet. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. Then they heard it, the soft thud of horse hooves on dry earth. They were coming. There were 5 of them this time, dark shapes moving through the moonlight. They didn't shout or make demands. They were here to kill, not to talk. The first shot came from the darkness, shattering the main window. Samuel and Margaret hit the floor, glass raining down around them. "They're trying to draw our fire," Samuel yelled over the ringing in his ears. "Don't shoot until you have a clean target." They were professionals. They moved with a chilling efficiency, taking cover, trying to find a weak point. Bullets thudded into the log walls, splintering the wood. It was a terrifying, relentless assault. For what felt like an eternity, Samuel and Margaret fired back, husband and wife fighting back to back, a tiny island of defiance against a tide of violence. One of the attackers made a break for the barn, hoping to set it ablaze. Margaret saw him. She rested the shotgun on the windowsill, took a deep breath, and fired. The man screamed and went down. 4 left. But they were running low on ammunition. The pile of cartridges between them was dwindling fast. The attackers must have sensed it because their assault intensified. 2 of them rushed the front door, trying to break it down with their shoulders. The heavy oak door shuddered, the bar holding it groaning in protest. "It's not going to hold," Margaret cried. Samuel looked around, his eyes wild. He saw the big cast-iron stove, its belly still glowing with embers from the dinner fire. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. "Help me!" he yelled. Together they shoved the heavy kitchen table against the wall, then put their shoulders to the stove. It was immensely heavy, but adrenaline and fear gave them strength. They pushed it, inch by painful inch, across the floor, positioning it directly in front of the door. The door burst open. 2 men spilled into the room, their pistols raised. They stopped dead, their eyes wide with shock as they came face to face with the red-hot iron of the stove. Samuel didn't hesitate. He fired, and one of the men fell. The other, screaming, stumbled back into his partner, his clothes already smoking where he'd brushed against the hot metal. He was an easy target. 2 left, but one of them had managed to get around to the back. A shot exploded from the rear window, and Samuel felt a searing, white-hot pain in his shoulder. He staggered back, dropping his rifle, a cry of pain torn from his throat. "Samuel!" Margaret screamed. She ran to his side as he slumped against the wall, his blood staining the white plaster. The last 2 attackers now rushed the broken doorway, sensing victory. Margaret stood over her wounded husband, the empty shotgun in her hands. She was out of shells. It was over. But Margaret O'Brien was not a woman who surrendered. As the first man stepped through the doorway, a triumphant sneer on his face, she swung the heavy shotgun like a club. The steel barrel connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He dropped like a stone. The final attacker, seeing his partner fall, raised his pistol to fire at her. But just as he pulled the trigger, another shot rang out, this one from outside. The man jerked, a look of surprise on his face before he crumpled to the floor. Standing in the moonlit yard, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle, was Tom Bradley. The sheriff wasn't coming. Tom had come back. He'd come back for his neighbor. Silence descended once more, broken only by Samuel's ragged breathing. Margaret dropped to her knees beside him, her hands frantically pressing against his bleeding shoulder. "Stay with me, Samuel," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Don't you dare leave me. Not now." He looked up at her, his vision blurring. He saw her face, strong and beautiful, framed by the chaos and destruction. He had asked for a slim, obedient wife to fill a silence. He had gotten a warrior queen who had brought a war to his doorstep and fought it by his side. "Never," he rasped, his hand finding hers. "Never." The sun rose on a scene of devastation. The house was riddled with bullet holes, the door was smashed, and the yard was littered with the consequences of the night's violence. The sheriff and his men finally arrived, their faces grim as they surveyed the scene and took Tom Bradley's statement. Samuel survived. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder. As Margaret tended to his wound, her touch gentle and sure, he watched her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the strength in her hands, the fierce love in her eyes. He had spent so long mourning a ghost, trying to replace a memory. But the realest thing in his life was right here, stitching his world back together. In the months that followed, they rebuilt. They patched the bullet holes, hung a new, stronger door, and swept away the last of the broken glass. The ranch, once a place of lonely silence, was now filled with the sounds of their shared life. One cool spring night, long after the last of the scars had faded, they were sitting by the fire. He had been quiet for a long time, just watching her. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Answering my letter?" She looked up from her sewing, her gray eyes soft in the firelight. "Do you regret writing it?" she countered. "I regret the man I was when I wrote it," he admitted. "He was a fool. He asked for a whisper and didn't know he needed a roar." She smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "Well," she said, her voice full of warmth, "I am glad he was a fool. Otherwise, I would have never found my home." Later that night, as they lay in the old bed, the one that had once felt so empty and cold, a sudden, tremendous crack echoed through the room. The ancient frame, weakened by years and likely a stray bullet or two, finally gave up. Boards split, the mattress tilted, and they tumbled to the floor in a heap of blankets and helpless laughter. Samuel, pinned beneath a laughing Margaret, looked up at the ceiling and roared. "The town was right," he wheezed, tears of mirth streaming down his face. "The bed wasn't sturdy enough." Margaret buried her face in his good shoulder, her body shaking with laughter. "We will never, ever live this down." "Let them talk," Samuel said, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her close amidst the wreckage. "Let them all talk. Let them say the rancher got more than he bargained for." He kissed her, a long, deep kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 more sunrises. Because he did. He got everything. Years passed. The ranch thrived. The sound of children's laughter eventually replaced the echo of gunfire. They built a new bed, carved from solid oak, strong enough to hold a lifetime of love. Samuel McKenna had sent a letter asking for a shadow to disappear into, and the West, in its infinite and brutal wisdom, had sent him the sun. It sent him Margaret, a woman who broke his bed, broke his pride, and rebuilt his entire world. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more tales you won't forget.